Good morning, and can I welcome you to this, the 6th meeting of 2013 of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I make the normal request that mobile phones and electronic devices are switched off because they interfere with our broadcasting? And moving on swiftly to agenda item 1, which is further evidence on this committee's inquiry on languages. And we have a panel of experts representing the business interest this morning. And if I can welcome Lauren Patterson, who's a Senior Policy Executive of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI in Scotland. Rebecca Trengrove, Head of Market and Corporate Affairs at Axion. And Robin Parker, who is the President of the National Union of Students at NUS in Scotland. Welcome to you all. Can I thank you all? Some of you provided us with written evidence, which is extremely helpful for us. And I'm going to go straight into questioning with the first question from myself, which is around about basically your insight and your interpretation of the 1+2 pilot project, how you think it will assist young people in developing skills that they can then use in the business market and obviously in their further educational needs. So I'm looking for your insight first and then maybe some more detailed questions afterwards. So, yeah, Lauren?
Sure. I think that we're very supportive of the policy. It's a policy which helps develop young people's employability skills, especially going forward into an increasingly globalising economy where they're not only competing internationally for jobs but also within their own country for jobs from international companies. I think that our members have said that they're not looking for fluency in a lot of cases from young people, but more conversational skills and the ability to understand and interpret different cultures, as that helps them cement relationships in those different countries and develop those relationships and ensure a strong relationship when countries or companies are looking to export. And we see export as extremely important going forward as we're trying to rebalance the economy, and those skills will be extremely helpful in that.
I would echo a lot of those comments. Certainly as a business, we find it invaluable to have language skills, and we don't get them at present from potential job applicants within Scotland. So anything that will redress that balance will be helpful. I think the 1+2 approach, particularly starting in primary schools, is very much to be welcomed, because I think the one thing it should do is develop confidence. I think teaching at the moment is a bit of a scattergun approach in primary schools. There's not necessarily consistency within what's done at the primary school level, and there certainly isn't necessarily the consistency of following that through at secondary level. And so my experience, partly as a parent, I have to say, is that by the time children reach the stage of making choices about which subjects they're going to take, in some cases they're turned off by languages. And although they've had several years nominally of language training, they're not actually in a position where they can use that conversationally. And that is what's critical. It's not written fluency we're looking for. It's the ability to be able to pick up a phone, have a polite conversation with somebody. And I think starting that in primary schools, I think really it's that confidence. It's developing children's confidence at an early stage so that they're willing to try new things out. That policy should be very helpful.
I suppose where I'm coming from at this is in terms of the employability really of course leavers and graduates. And something we found through a lot of the projects we've been doing and some of the research that we've done is that language skills are hugely valuable when it comes to employability. And I draw attention to the CBI survey that we referenced in some of the evidence that we put in, and sort of employers really saying that this was something they're really crucially looking for in terms of when it came to recruiting graduates, and really not satisfied with things as they stand. And I've not got figures specifically for Scotland, but across the UK it's been estimated at about 7.3 billion is what it costs the UK in terms of underinvestment in languages. So huge numbers that we're talking about in terms of the UK here. I suppose as well, like I think as Rebecca was saying, there's value in of itself from where we're coming in terms of giving graduates, giving people coming out of their course very much a global outlook in terms of confidence, in terms of the confidence to go anywhere in terms of finding employment and in terms of helping out with the Scottish economy. I I think the other thing I'd highlight is in terms of where we're also coming from on this is the earlier that people are given the opportunities to pick up languages, and the first language is always the first extra language that you pick up is always the hardest one. The extra languages after that become much easier, and the sooner you learn that and you pick up that skill of language acquisition, the easier it's going to become. And we're really interested in terms of when it comes to people arriving at college or university, if they've got those extra language skills, it becomes much easier for them to get study abroad experience. And again, that's something we've found is hugely important in terms of employability and in terms of people being able to find a job when they graduate.
Okay, that's a really nice segue into my next question, was about specifically to the NUS, but from a business point of view as well. How do we encourage institutions to make more use of Comenius and Erasmus, for instance, and how would business use those students? So it sort of ties in, but if the NUS could maybe give us some indication of how we can encourage institutions to use Comenius EU funding and Erasmus for exactly the situation you've explained.
Well, I think one of the really important things about Comenius is that it is available to all students who might even just be interested in a teaching career, so they don't necessarily have to already decided on a teaching career to undertake it. Well, I suppose like all Erasmus type programs, all study abroad type programs, the uptake of it is very low in Scotland, and we're a very long way behind a lot of our European competitors in terms of uptake. So in terms of measured mobility in Scotland, we're at less than 1% of students in Scotland who are having some form of recorded overseas experience as part of their course. And if you look at places like Spain, Germany, it can be up to 40–60% of students who are having that. So we've got a huge way to go. In terms of the project that we're undertaking at the moment called Scotland Goes Global, what we're trying to do with that is essentially anything we can. It's a Scottish Government funded project. Anything we can to increase the mobility of students. I think we're doing kind of awareness type programs within universities and colleges, but I think one of the really exciting things that we've started trying very recently is in terms of going out into schools, and we've trained up a series of student ambassadors who themselves have had experience of outward mobility. They're going into schools and making sure that school pupils, before they even come to university or college, are aware of the type of programs that are available to them. And now I can't prove that it's been down to our project, but it's something that we've been promoting a lot, is the Comenius programme in particular, and it's one of the programmes that is starting to pick up, albeit from a very low base. It is starting to pick up in terms of uptake, and that's something that I certainly hope can continue in future, because it is a very good project.
Okay, our business colleagues, maybe give an insight at how you would use, that situation of, exchange students, foreign students, especially in a more globalised market?
Well, certainly we regularly take on student interns to do specific business-focused projects, and we do that by working with the local universities in Dundee and St Andrews. And what is always quite staggering is that almost all the applications for those internships are from foreign students. So these are students who, in most cases, English is not their first language. But for some reason, and maybe that's an indicator of the type of student that's chosen to come here, those are the ones that are interested in getting that extra experience. And from our point of view, not only do they have the technical skills, but they have the language skills as well. And that's also a factor when we're employing people on full-term contracts as well. Just picking up on that point about the students going into schools, I think that's an excellent opportunity, and something that I think should be rolled into the pilot projects for the 2+1. I know that SILT, that's Scotland's Centre for Supporting Language Teaching, have a number of pilot projects excuse me, where they're looking at businesses working with schools, probably initially with secondary schools, but they're keen to roll that out to primary schools as well, so that children from a fairly early stage, possibly around about P5, P6, can start seeing the business applications for languages as well, quite apart from the cultural and social advantages for doing that. And I think the Scotland Goes Global ambassadors could play an important part in that programme.
I think picking up on Rebecca's point about businesses going into schools is a really important one, and that's something that we would encourage our members to do, because not only does it open up the the importance of languages to young people and give them an opportunity to look ahead and see what careers they can have with those skills. It also gives the businesses themselves the opportunity to develop their own staff and give them confidence in working with other young people. And I know that on a personal level I had benefit of that when I was at school. The local authority has a really good working relationship with IBM, and when we did business French classes where we worked with IBM and sat with IBM staff on calls, and that was really important, and it developed a sense of how you use French once you leave school. It's not just about the sort of vocabulary that you learn in school, it's about how it's actually applied in the real world. And I think if that sort of programme could be rolled out across the rest of Scotland, even if it's not across every school, but having that option to access that, then that would be really important and would be a real positive.
Could I just make one additional comment? I think the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths, are really very good at doing this. And we as a company have been involved in a number of STEM projects with a local school in Dundee, and I think that's a great exemplar of what you can do to motivate children and give them a real business type project that they can work on that gives them an indication of how they could use those skills in the working environment, and not necessarily at graduate level. We're talking about children developing these skills that could be applied in any working context.
Just briefly, in terms of undergraduates who are undertaking outward mobility as part of their course at the moment, two things that sprung up in what Rebecca and Lauren were saying. Firstly, at a national level, you can't measure whether these are Scottish students or whether they are Scottish or EU students. It's all measured together. But we've looked at a couple of universities in particular and dug down into the data, and it looks like probably of that 1%, actually a lot of those are already European students who've come to Scotland and who are then going somewhere else. They've already caught the mobility bug. So it's a good thing. So the number of Scottish students who are actually undertaking outward mobility could be even lower than that 1% figure. And the other thing I was going to pick up on, in terms of, again, in terms of mobility, it's quite a narrow group of people who are doing it in terms of what they're studying. At the moment, it's very much language students who are undertaking mobility. And that's despite there being courses in other parts of Europe that are undertaken in English. So there are opportunities for STEM students, for other kinds of students to be undertaking much more mobility than they currently are. So there's real scope to increase the numbers.
Thanks very much. Jamie, did you want in a supplementary on this subject?
On question one, if that's all right.
Yep, on you go.
Can I start apologising for not being here at the start due to traffic problems? It's been put to me that some Scottish students find that if they are put off studying abroad because it interferes with their curriculums in their studying at home in Scotland. Do you have any? Can you comment on this at all?
I think one of the things that certainly universities could do much more is increase the flexibility within their curriculum. A lot of them are restrictive towards only allowing large periods of study abroad, so a whole year, kind of under Erasmus type programs, Comenius type programs, towards the start of the degree. And universities could be much more flexible later on in a degree program to allow study abroad. And I think it also points out the need to create much more kind of short-term windows, so opportunities for people to maybe just study abroad for like a 2 or 3 week intensive type program, and that would help sort of widen access to study abroad as well.
Before I move into open questions, can I just take the opportunity right now to welcome to our public gallery today the Honourable Tindwa MP and the Honourable Uno MP, who are both MPs from the Malawian Parliament, and very nicely Albert is my parliamentary pair, so welcome to our committee this morning. Hans Alla.
Thank you. Welcome from me as well. Good morning, panel. You talk about internationalisation and you talk about opportunities and so on, and I'm just wondering, how are we currently coping with the shortfall of language skills in Scotland today?
A lot of our members have seen that they're using individuals in the countries that they're exporting to make those connections and develop those skills. However, also they're now training up their own staff. We have one of our international drinks companies recently bought a product over in the Dominican Republic, and whilst they're using individuals in the Dominican Republic to do a lot of the business, all their executive team are now getting Spanish lessons so that when they go over they can have conversations even just on a sort of general basis with the people over there. So I think that there's a lot of sort of patchworking up of the skills by providing intensive training for the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in our case, although we're headquartered in Scotland, we also have a manufacturing site in Poland, and we've chosen to site our customer services department in Poland because we can get the language skills there. So of the team there, not only do they all speak Polish and English, they also speak, most of them speak German, and many of them also speak French or Italian or Spanish as well. So we can find those multilingual people over there, and so that's where the jobs go. What we also do is we will recruit international staff. So we have staff working here in Scotland who are Chinese, Italian, Spanish, French, because they're bringing technical skills and they bring the language skills as well.
Don't think I have much to add to.
Yeah, I'm just a supplementary on that. I mean, so what you're really saying is the fact that we are poor in language skills, we're actually losing jobs to countries overseas.
And we're not just losing jobs overseas, we are losing jobs here in Scotland.
Yeah.
And I think that trend will continue as time goes on. I mean, one of the things I'm struck by, and Robin's really made this point already, is the number of foreign students studying in Scotland. So, and I've said, you know, those are the ones who are applying for internships. When I go and speak at universities on business topics, it's predominantly an international audience. Our Scottish students are not engaging with the international agenda. And they're going to find themselves disadvantaged at graduation or when they leave school.
Interesting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Claire Adamson.
Thank you. You've already given us some examples of working with the universities and sort of good practice out there, but do you think there could be more done with colleges and universities engaging with business about what the skills needs and the future planning needs will be in the area of languages?
It's always helpful, but actually I think it starts at schools, because I think by the time children get to university, it's too late. They either are switched on and are engaging, or in most cases they're not. So that's why I think the 2+1 agenda is so important, and getting them hooked, certainly at primary school and in the early years of secondary. So yes, the universities have a role to play, and it was encouraging, just when we were speaking in the ante-room beforehand, it was encouraging hearing that, I think it was Aberdeen University, Lauren was saying, is now discovering that a lot of students who are studying law, accountancy, are asking to do language as supplementary, which is great, and that's exactly what we want to happen. But it needs to start before that.
I think it isn't often enough that people in the academic sector and people in the business sector get together and talk about kind of policy, and particularly in this area. So one of the things we are doing as part of our Scotland Goes Global project is hosting a conference that is designed to bring together people from the academic sphere and people from the business sphere to talk about study abroad, but also to talk about more widely about how we make Scottish education sort of internationally facing, internationally focused and around language. And I think that example in terms of language is really important. I think, I guess where we're coming from is I think we need to start language learning much earlier and right down into primary school. But I think it needs to be right across the piece in terms of the core subjects, the subjects we're all familiar with, learning those, but also alongside it having the flexibility to learn language as well. And I think the Aberdeen example is a very good one, because the flexibility is being built into the curriculum so that students can learn languages alongside their main course of study. I think that's the way forward.
Okay. I think moving on to a different subject, or maybe a segue into that subject. Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. I wonder if I could invite you to look forward beyond the 1+2 to later school and early university perhaps, and to think about modern languages in the context of science and engineering. And Rebecca, you touched on STEM earlier. Do you think the curriculum as it is at the moment is flexible enough to allow that kind of transition to take place? And do you think our Scottish youngsters are sufficiently aware of the importance of combining languages with subjects like science and engineering? And if not, how can we improve that so that they are?
Okay, I think the curriculum, I take it you mean the curriculum in schools, curriculum for excellence. Yeah, I think curriculum for excellence is it offers a great potential for integrating that. And I've seen that happening in my children's school, which has embraced it fairly early on. and looking at this interdisciplinary learning. And I think languages and STEM are potentially a very good match. And again, I can think of an example in Dundee where there is a technology-based company that has a parent French company, and they're looking at bringing kids into school to work, into the workplace to understand how they can use languages and then go back to school and work on a kind of technical project, but with a language, but through the medium of a language. So that's a great example. So yes, it can definitely be done. I think the difficulty is that in S4, going down to 6 subjects, obviously it means that children are choosing to focus on the ones where they have the most interest. And I think that's at the stage where the more scientific children are dropping languages, or the other way round. So I think if there's a way of continuing that in some form, that would be ideal. I don't think children are getting the message that languages are really important for them. I don't think they're getting that at all. Or I think they're not getting it anything like as much as they need to. And there's no doubt that STEM subjects they get a lot of attention, quite rightly. There is a big gap, and there will be an even greater gap over the next couple of decades for people with those skills. But those will not just be jobs in the UK. Increasingly, as both my colleagues have said, all jobs will become more and more international. Companies are developing much greater global supply chains, and therefore the ability to interact with other countries will be really, really important. And it doesn't really matter what language it is they're learning at school, as long as they get that understanding of how you learn a language, which I think other people have already said. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I agree. I think they are both really important. They are both. They're not mutually exclusive, and more needs to be done to encourage children to realise that languages will be useful and they will be a medium for progressing STEM careers.
I can't really say much for the secondary school element, other than to say that just to reinforce the point around a lot of people when they arrive at university or college don't have a very sound grounding in terms of languages, which is why I think what we're talking about today is so important. In terms of starting with universities, I think some universities are building that flexibility and of their own volition. I think encouraging other universities to do the same would be positive. I think sometimes there's a perception around some of the professional bodies that accredit some curriculum in some STEM areas that they can present a barrier. That's something I'm not sure the extent to which that's true or not. I think some do absolutely actually encourage that curriculum flexibility, and it's the institutions who aren't responding to that. But maybe it's an area to explore with some of the professional bodies about whether they could do more to encourage the institutions, or they could create more flexibility in, when they're accrediting courses. The other thing I was going to mention around the university sector, and your colleague Claire Adamson will know it well from the post-16 bill that's going through just now. And one of the things that's proposed in the post-16 bill is the power to essentially review the landscape of education, and it's caused some concern in some parts of the higher education sector. It's something we're a bit more, at NUS, a bit more, it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, and this is clearly an area where there's potential for it to be a good thing, to make sure that somewhere in Scotland there is enough language provision happening, and some of the problems that we saw particularly at Glasgow University a couple of years back with some of their Eastern European languages is quite a good example. So I think anything that will promote collaboration between universities to make sure that someone somewhere is providing all the particularly the smaller languages and particularly internationally significant languages is a good thing. I think maybe just to mention on the college sector, I think I suppose the problem just now is in terms of the funding situation for colleges, and therefore anything that is perceived to be an added extra, colleges are finding it difficult to provide beyond the kind of things that are really core to their purpose.
Just see if you were to have a look, Robin, at take a snapshot of, say, final year students, engineering science students at any of the universities and so on. Is there any indication of how many of those students, Scottish students perhaps, do have a language or have taken it as part of their university study? Is there a change beginning to take place, or are we still some way behind realising the importance of combining science and engineering with a language, do you think?
I certainly wouldn't have any figures off the top of my head. It's something I can see if I can find. What I can say would be around the kind of the study abroad, which is not exactly the same thing, but the area I'm more familiar with, and the numbers of STEM students who've experienced some sort of study abroad thing are tiny, particularly in comparison to other European countries.
I've got a couple of supplementaries on this line of questioning. First up, Claire Adamson, and then Jamie.
Yeah, if I could just ask Rebecca, you mentioned that you didn't think pupils had an understanding of how important language was, but in some of the evidence we've been taking in the Education and Culture Committee as well, we've talked about the skills gaps in Scotland in terms of STEM subjects, which you've already mentioned, underrepresentation of women in these subjects in particular. Do you think it's a specific problem with language, or do you think that our young people are just not fully informed about what the employment prospects are and what the opportunities are in Scotland as a whole?
I think it's probably a bit of both. It's certainly the case that I think children don't have a good understanding of what employment prospects are. Because teachers don't, because teachers are educational professionals and they tend to have only taught, so they tend not to be aware of the changing world of work. And I think that's one area where better school work relations would probably help. In terms of languages, I think it's a cultural thing. I think there is this dreadful supposition that we have in Britain that everybody speaks English and therefore we don't need to learn another language, and that's very, very pervasive. So it's not necessarily the school's fault. That's coming through. That's at home. That's people going on holiday abroad and finding that they can get by without, they can go to Torremolinos and not have to speak any Spanish at all. So it's rather more pervasive, I think. But it's one that I think needs to be challenged, because that may be the case now, but it's not necessarily going to be the case in 20 years' time.
There's some great British Council stats on exactly that point. I think we overestimate just the extent to which English is a global language. It is the global language, but it's not to the extent that we imagine it. And only 6% of the world's population speak English as a first language, so it's tiny in terms of first language. And then 75% of the world don't speak any English at all. So if you only speak English, you only speak to a quarter of the world's population.
I think going back to the point about informing our young people, though, I think that the careers advice that young people get should happen a lot earlier in schools, and they should have discussions about careers and what happens after school a lot earlier. Whilst My World of Work, which is the website from Skills Development Scotland, is a hugely important tool, and it's a fantastic tool for young people. I think that there has to be more one-to-one discussion with young people much earlier on, and I think that if we can have more language learning and more discussions about languages and why they're important, I think that may be pulled through a lot easier.
Yep, Jamie McGregor.
Yes, thanks. I just want to pick you up on a point on when you said that it didn't matter what the language was that you learnt. Because recently I visited a very good primary school where they were particularly studying French and Gaelic and Scots languages. And one point that was made was that if they had the funding for the other languages that they had for Gaelic, everything would be wonderful, because there was so much more funding for Gaelic than anything else. This was, why didn't we have the funding for the other languages just like we had it for Gaelic? What I wanted to ask you really was, from a business point of view, would you still maintain that Gaelic was just as important as any other language to learn? And the other question I wanted to ask, just to take up Mr. Parker's remark, that you're speaking to that only 6% of the world use English, and 75% of the world don't know English at all. Are you talking about the entire population or the population of the business community?
Entire population.
So to your question about Gaelic for business, no, I don't believe Gaelic is useful for business, out with a small part of the Gaelic-speaking west coast of Scotland. There are cultural reasons for learning Gaelic, and having learnt Gaelic will undoubtedly help you learn other languages. But from a business point of view, I don't believe that's particularly useful. That is a personal point, I would stress.
I was actually trying, when you said that it didn't matter what language you learned.
No, because what you're learning is you're learning a system, you're learning a different way of thinking. It's understanding how languages can work in different ways. And Gaelic, I think, is I don't speak Gaelic, but the little I know about it suggests it is a very different type of language from English. So if you've understood the structure for Gaelic, you can understand that the structure of German is going to be different from English, and therefore there will be some similarities in grammar and grammatical structure and the way the language works, and you can apply that from one language to another. So certainly I first studied French, then German, then Russian, and increasingly it became easier to learn those languages because I understood how languages work as a structure. So to that extent, learning Gaelic would be helpful for learning any other language or any other Indo-European language.
I think if you're brought up bilingual, whether that's English and Gaelic or whether that's English and Polish, the closer you are to being brought up bilingually, the easier it is to acquire further languages.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's a transferable skill, and I think when we look at the spread of languages that businesses are looking for, I don't think that it's feasible for all Scottish schools to provide access to all of those languages. So if we provide the young people with the skills to therefore diverge into those different languages, then that's what we need to do.
Okay. Okay. Rod Campbell.
Morning, panel. Rebecca, you talked earlier on about SILT and business in schools. The Minister, Dr. Alistair Allen, has said there might be value in considering the use of business champions, supporting language learning in schools and the cultural background in the workplace. Could you, perhaps the panel as a whole, just give me your thoughts as to how far you think business champions are feasible?
It's certainly feasible. It depends on the number of companies and the types of companies willing to commit and the levels to which they can engage. So a bigger company is likely to have more resources. So the company to which I alluded earlier in Dundee is a very large company, one of the major employers in Dundee. They have a great deal of interaction with their parent company in France. So they have a very clear focus there. With a smaller company, I think it's harder to work with as big a group of youngsters as a bigger company can. Nevertheless, I think companies are willing to engage in this. Certainly, following a speech I gave at a language conference in November, I made contact with a number of companies locally, and they were willing to support this agenda to different levels. So I think it really depends on an individual company and the resources they have. But there is a willingness, there is a general willingness among certainly the business people I speak to, that we need to support our young people's learning, whether that's on STEM subjects, whether that's on language learning, whether that's on understanding how the workplace works, because those are our future employees, and therefore we have a duty to help them understand what skills they need to acquire so that they can become potential employees for us. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we see a general willingness amongst all our members as well to get engaged, even if it is at the basic level of providing work experience for young people. When you get to smaller employers, they tend not to have the resource to facilitate a huge amount of time going into schools and helping support that, but that's due to the fact that they have smaller numbers and have to focus on running their business. But I would say that it's not that they're not wanting to engage, I just think it's a purely time critical thing rather than, but I do think there is a general willingness amongst business to get engaged with the agenda.
Earlier on about IBM, we've got other examples of kind of business engaging through work experience, apprenticeship training or otherwise, but specifically in terms of promoting language skills.
I've not got any more examples of work experience examples. What I do have an example of is companies getting involved with a local school in Renfrewshire, which had their language department actually had a careers day which focused purely on which careers you could access with language skills, and they got in contact to see if some of our members would go along and speak to their pupils about that, and we had a really good response to that. So it's not, I suppose that's a sort of a small role that businesses can play, but it could be a really effective one in speaking to young people and informing them of what opportunities are out there, and it's looking a bit broader than the sort of basic careers advice you would normally get.
There's another one I've heard about, which was a whisky company. I think it was somewhere in the Central Belt or Perthshire, which did a lot of business in China. And they actually hooked up with a local school that was doing a trial of Mandarin. And they had a group of senior pupils in, and they did a teleconference with people in Beijing. So that was one company. There was another one up in Aberdeen, which was an oil-based company, and I think it was German in their case. They had an affiliate over there. So there are companies that want to do this. I think part of the blockage for them doing that is a mechanism by which they can do that. And again, speaking to the people from SILT yesterday, they've now got a couple of pilots going and they're keen to roll these out. And it'll be a question of resources and willingness of both schools who want to engage and businesses who are willing to host them.
I think the engagement that does happen just now depends on the school and the business involved, and I think you're right. I don't think there's a central mechanism for businesses that want to get involved to say, actually, I would be quite happy to get involved in the sort of school agenda. And I think if there was, I don't know how you do that, but if there was a sort of way for that engagement to happen, so that it's not just a pick up the phone from the teacher or a connection through a parent or an employee, then that would be a real benefit as well.
One of the things that we referenced in our evidence was around a report that we put together called Developing Scotland's Graduates for the Global Economy. And one of the things, there are some case studies, I think, in there, and even, I think, some videos from employers talking about the value of college and university graduates who have a global perspective. And so I think some of the same kind of principles apply when you're talking into school pupils. So the only thing I might say is, I think the points around placements are also very well put by colleagues on the panel. I suppose the only thing I might say is around, in terms of that kind of more peer approach, in terms of promoting some of these things. And I think that's one of the reasons why what we've been doing around getting graduates here, current students here, perhaps a bit younger, in terms of talking to school pupils about the value of study abroad, that can be really, really effective.
So that perhaps this is a bit concentrated on bigger businesses. We had a written submission from the Federation of Small Businesses, which I didn't say was very positive in terms of promotion of languages. Any thoughts on that? Is it something that big business only is interested in?
I think that, I can't speak for the FSB or their members. But I do think that a lot of them are sort of small micro businesses, and a lot of them maybe don't even have any employees. So for them to give up time and resource away from running their business would be a big ask for them. I don't think it's huge multinational businesses. I think there's quite a lot of medium-sized businesses that would also be interested in it as well.
And I think on that point about I think it was a broader point about the importance of languages for business. And yes, the FSB's submission did suggest that it wasn't important for their members. As Lauren said, I think a lot of those businesses are very small, and a lot of them are probably service business who don't see the need to export. They might see the need, though, if you've got people coming into Scotland. So if they're tourism-related businesses, having staff with language skills may not be crucial to the business, but it might be an additional extra that they can offer. If you're a B&B owner and you can speak to your guests in their native language, maybe they give you a bigger tip. It's not a huge amount, but that's the sort of thing that I think where people can see a bit of benefit. And the other point I'd make is that businesses change. Business is very dynamic, and what might start off as a small business grows, and its needs change, and it gets bought by another business, and therefore employees have different opportunities open to them. So I think just saying that it's a small business, we don't need languages, is a slightly narrow way of thinking, and it doesn't leave you open to the possibility that things could change.
Okay, well, Coffee, do you want a supplementary? Yeah?
Thanks very much. A supplementary. I really have to spring to the defence of Gaelic, I think, there from some of the comments that were made earlier, and the Celtic languages in particular. There's many hundreds of thousands of youngsters speak their Celtic language as their first language, and I would hate the committee to have the view expressed that somehow that's of no value and will be of no value in a business life to come. There are many, many thousands of youngsters who grow into adults who do use their Celtic language, whether it be Gaelic, Irish or Welsh, in a business, in an employment setting. And I think it's important to recognise that, of course, we shouldn't confuse the teaching of Gaelic, Irish or Welsh with the modern language agenda. There are clear reasons why governments in Scotland, Wales and Ireland offer their native language to their children to speak. And I think, Rebecca, you mentioned whisky a wee moment ago. I think it's a particular example where skills in speaking Gaelic would be actually very helpful, because many of our world-class whisky brands have uniquely branded Gaelic names, and there's, to my knowledge, not many people around the business world can even pronounce what the names of the whiskies actually are. And that happens in companies from Diageo right down the way. So I think we really have to defend our natural indigenous languages and offer our children as much support as we can to combine those with other modern European languages, Convener.
Well said.
There's just a comment or a question, but you're welcome to comment back if you wish.
I certainly had no intention of attacking Gaelic, and I did try and make the point that I think there are parts in Scotland where it is very useful. And I also would echo my earlier point that learning any other language, or any additional language to your native language, is helpful. So if it's a native Scot or English speaker learning Gaelic, that will be helpful for learning other languages. If it's a native Gaelic speaker learning English for the first time, is going to be helpful. And Robin's absolutely right. Being brought up bilingually is a huge advantage for in a whole number of ways, not just in the acquisition of other languages. But I do take your point.
Jimmy McGregor.
I felt perhaps that point might have been slightly addressed to my question, my earlier question. I have always supported Gaelic. Can I just say that as an MSP for Highlands and Islands? And we are here surely to ask the people from the business community just what they think about the languages, not about what we think about them. I was the other point I made, I think I'm right in saying, was that the Gaelic medium, well, what they expressed to me at the school that I recently visited, was that if other languages had the same amount of money put into them as Gaelic had, it would be a better thing altogether, because then they could all be taught better.
Both points are very well made. Thank you very, very much. Colleagues get any more questions? I think we have actually exhausted our questions, but if there's anything you'd like to add, then happy to hear that.
Just briefly on Mr. McGregor's point, I think around that's really one of your important questions for the inquiries about the costs. And again, like many, I think, of your previous people who've provided evidence, I don't have anything to say on what is the right amount or whether the amount on the table is or isn't enough. I think all I would say is that from the point of view of NUS, the 1+2 approach is extremely important, and for more primary school pupils to get the opportunities to learn an additional language is going to be extremely important to Scotland's future. So I think all I would say is if we're going to do this, let's do it properly. I think the other thing I would just wanted to get in at some point was around the approach that we take to language teaching. And I think often in schools it's from quite a mechanistic point of view, and it's from quite a kind of this is how it works kind of way, rather than from an enjoyable, fun kind of very applicable, very applied kind of approach to learning it. And so I think I'd encourage that approach.
I think one of the things that we have certainly picked up in our investigations in schools is the difference between how languages are taught at secondary school level and the difference from what we have seen in the pilot schools, where we have been in classes where children have started and finished the class right through in the one language, the primary ones, counting, alphabet, games, songs, the whole gambit, and the enjoyment and the motivation. And the most important thing is the confidence it gives those young children. We've seen 5-year-olds who are much more bilingual than I could ever dream of being, who the confidence is just absolutely oozing from them, and it's that's a key point. If they feel happy and confident and actually quite smart that they can do this, and the difference is amazing. You're absolutely right. As a parent of a 14-year-old, getting to sit down and do Spanish is very difficult, because open book and it's a bit, this is a bit boring. Take him to a Spanish country and say use some of the languages, he's used that much better. So you're absolutely right, Mr. Parker, in as much as how do we give an enjoyment to the actual process of study that builds that confidence, and that's something we've seen a pretty marked difference in. So well made, thank you, Rebecca.
May I add to that point? I think I completely agree, and I think that will be absolutely critical to changing the way that language is taught in Scotland. I think that will require a fair degree of revised teacher training, and I would just urge the committee to ensure that the funding that's is there has, I mean, I can't say what the funding should be, but it needs to be sufficient that there is really good quality teacher training for the people, and not just in the pilot, but once it's rolled out. And that takes me on to my second point, which is that a comment that's been made by Director of Education, that in other areas of the curriculum where there have been curriculum changes, they've been an aspiration rather than a commitment, and that leaves quite a lot of wiggle room, and it's a crowded curriculum, there are a lot of demands on teachers. So I would urge the committee to try and make this as, you know, as definite as possible, and give the education sector that long-term commitment that this is something that the government wants to do and expects to happen over a long period of time, because it's that commitment over a long time period which will give them the confidence to really roll it out.
One of the clear objectives from the government is that commitment, but you're absolutely right. How do we roll that out from the pilot? Any other comments or questions?
In terms of the training, I think one of the ways to approach it might be, and I made similar comments about the STEM issue, so particularly for BEd students who are studying at universities, there's perhaps more opportunity, and whether that's through the teaching council, whether that's through the institutions themselves, to give those students the flexibility to learn a second language alongside their main course of education study. So it's a language that the university is providing alongside the main course of study, and that would allow those who haven't had the opportunity at secondary school or primary school to get a qualification. And so that might help with some of the discussions that you've had previously about whether it should be a requirement for entry to teaching study.
I think that's one of the questions I think we have on our list for the Minister, who's our next visitor to the committee in a few weeks' time. So can I take this opportunity to thank you very much for your evidence. It's been very valuable and very insightful from our point of view, from the educational point of view and the business point of view, to bring that together. I wasn't sure whether it would work, but I think it's worked, and you've complemented each other very, very well. So thank you for that. If there's any other statistics or information or anything you think will inform our future work on this topic, we'd be delighted to hear from you, and the clerk would certainly provide that conduit for that exchange of information. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. I think we'll break for 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay, welcome back to the European External Relations Committee. Moving on to agenda item 2. Claire Adamson, Willie Coffey, Jamie Grigger and myself have recently attended various visits to primary schools across the country, and of course the launch was in Glasgow with Hanzala as part of the committee's ongoing inquiries into teaching foreign languages in primary school. And I think we'll give some feedback to the committee on the outcomes of these visits, and we're going to kick off with Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much. Convener, could I first of all record my thanks to Eileen Martin, who accompanied me to the meeting in East Ayrshire with the 2 schools, and also Alistair McCallum, Gaelic officer. Eileen very helpfully took some notes of the meeting, which was absolutely fantastic to see. I visited Darvel Primary School and Comores Primary School, both of which I know very well in East Ayrshire, both teaching French. And in Darvel we were visiting the primary 7 children who get about an hour of French every week. Before primary 6, some of the pupils were saying to us that they're still having difficulty learning English. So there was a great debate took place, Convener, between the children in the pupil forum that we had about whether it was appropriate to have 1+2 or more languages when the children were still getting to grips with the English language, and that was a fantastic debate about that. And opinions are split evenly, I think. But if it was about choices, some of the children felt that the emerging economy languages were quite important to focus on, for example, Chinese or Russian. And they thought that would be particularly useful, as did the parent who attended. She felt that if there was a choice to be made, it would be useful if it was some of the emerging economy languages that there was a slightly better focus towards. The teacher there, she has a degree in modern languages, very dedicated, very professional. But she did say that she thought she would prefer 1 extra language to start with to maintain the quality of language teaching. She felt that introducing 2 might dilute effort and so on and so forth, with the additional resource that would be required to support that. Looking beyond that, Convener, to the secondary, she of course then highlighted the need for additional resources if we were to maintain that strategy through and beyond, and that's a message I think that's probably been shared with the members from other committees, other visits. Turning to Comores Primary School, who are also doing French, and this time we had a wonderful opportunity to see what was going on with the primary 3, primary 4 class in their French lessons, and we saw about 2 sessions, doing some work in the classroom and some work in the gymnasium. So they were trying to offer the children experience in the French language in different settings within the school, which was really, really helpful. Interestingly, the children there were interested in languages from Sri Lanka, and they wanted to learn Japanese, and some of them wanted to learn American, which was really wonderful to hear that. And interestingly too, in both the schools, the children thought that their learning was enhanced by looking at cartoons with subtitles, and obviously looking at sport and seeing things on TV. The teacher at Comores Primary School, she has a higher in Russian, the Russian language. And she stressed the importance of the transition that members have been aware of too, moving from primary to secondary. It was really important to get that right. She also mentioned the GLOW facility that's available from Education Scotland, and that can really provide some exciting interchanges between schools in an online and a safe environment, which is, for Scottish children, isn't really available through the normal sources of media and TV and so on. So GLOW could be developed much more to support that. Having a language and teaching it are 2 different things, the teacher said, so she emphasised the need and the importance of training if we have to take this forward. The curriculum is pretty full as well. I think it was a common message at both schools, Convener. So what do we take out to make way for this additional second language? So there needs to be some thinking there on how we construct and build the curriculum. Foreign language assistants were mentioned too, and I think there was a plea from both schools that we do something in that regard to try to assist the process and to take this whole project forward. But very, very positive. Hugely impressed with the work going on at the two schools, and incredibly impressed with the skills and the ability of these young students in Darvel and Comores primary schools, and they're a credit to not only to their schools but to their families as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very detailed and insightful visit. You obviously enjoyed yourself. Can I invite Jamie now to give us an overview of his visit to Lochyside Primary School in Fort William? And you made it to Fort William and you made it back out.
Yes, I did. It was quite snowy going through Glencoe, but it was fine. One of the teachers very kindly took some notes for me, and I'm very grateful to her. And I got the following morning, I got a little letter saying, "Dear Jamie, it's such a pleasure to welcome to the school this morning. Thank you on behalf of all the staff and pupils. We appreciate your interest and support for our book project. I've attached the notes." So that was very nice. Now, I gave them a set of the questions that the committee was asking. And so I'll just tell you what they were. The answers were, what does the committee want to find out for its inquiry? First, is there enough money? The answer was insufficient information to answer the question. B, do existing teachers have the skills? We should carry out a national audit to ascertain current position of skills in modern languages. Teaching resources. Gaelic resources are excellent. They include audio, visual and display materials, all provided as part of the training and are very relevant to CFE methods. MLP's French, none of the above. Schools are obliged to buy or make their own resources for use with pupils. Good ideas are now coming from websites such as Passport Francophone, which are suitable for CFE. There is no formal training in Scots at present. A good range of materials is available commercially for schools to buy and staff to make their own resources. Should there be more training and support? These should be ongoing. The training should be ongoing for existing teachers to maintain fluency, confidence and relevance. Training and support would be good for morale. At present, some language teachers can feel isolated or that their language is undervalued by colleagues. Not in this school. Regular contact with colleagues at ASG level would also help through an agreed programme of work ensuring coverage, progression and continuity, particularly at transition stage. What is the capacity within the curriculum to accommodate greater language study? Can it be embedded in existing teaching? The best way to accommodate extra language study is through CFE, where language work can easily be integrated with cross-curricular activities. The We Books project was designed with this in mind. The We Books project was a brilliant thing where they had, it was designed by the art department in the school, which was a wonderful thing called Room 13, which again looks completely independent and pays for all its own materials. I was incredibly impressed by that. The pupils design a sort of, it's not really a cartoon book, but it was the particular book I looked at was about the life of the banana. And it was done in French. And but it was beautifully done. It was sort of audio-visual sort of book. And done by the children. So they all took note of that. I've just, without boring you, finish this off. Organisation within schools would need to be arranged according to individual circumstances, i.e. number of trained staff, composite classes, school role, etc. Such a cross-curricular approach also requires careful monitoring of progression and coverage. Which languages should children be learning and why? I suggest they should be learning Scots and Gaelic because they are our native languages. Traditionally, French and German have been taught, so more staff are ready available to deliver lessons in those languages than in Norwegian or Spanish, for example. What is the role of languages in economic development? It facilitates other learning. Learning additional languages encourages a broad-minded approach to other cultures, It widens the scope for employment and business, both personally and as a nation. What should children be learning to help them get jobs, help Scotland flourish economically? From an economic point of view, at present, perhaps Mandarin might be a good language for children to learn. So that's the answers to the questions. And I can tell you that they certainly were having no problem with English either. They were very, very voluble, these children. And they were extremely confident and obviously enjoying the language. I took part in a French lesson, and since I can speak a little French myself, poor children, I was actually invited to teach for a little bit of the time. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a good example of a very, very good progress in what they're trying to achieve with the 2+1. But I thought the remark about the Gaelic having so many more resources was actually very telling. And the feeling that, if the other languages were resourced in that sort of way, a lot more progress could be made. So I think that's really all I have to say about the school, except that I'm very glad I went, and it was a very useful experience for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, a very detailed report and something with lots of questions and answers and information.
So that they have
that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Can I now invite Claire Adamson to give us an overview about our visit to a primary school in my constituency, Mackenhill Primary School in Larkhall?
Yes, thank you, Convener. It was a very snowy morning when we arrived at Mackenhill Primary, and the school was under quite a bit of pressure through staff not being able to make it in. But nonetheless, we had two wonderful sessions with a representative of the school council from primary 1 right up to primary 7, and there were quite a few members in that sort of round circle discussion that we had with the convener, and then we were both given an opportunity to go to different classes and see the language teaching and operation. And like the previous school visit into St Margaret's, or St Elizabeth's rather, in South Lanarkshire, the teaching in the classroom was an immersion teaching. It was a whole game being done by the pupils in French, and there were normal activities every day, like ordering their lunch, that were done in French as well. In the circle discussion, all of the children were really enthusiastic about what they were doing, and the enthusiasm across with younger siblings and older siblings in the family was there, and they talked about how it influenced their family home life, but all the children were discussing at different levels, and older children were helping younger siblings with the language. One of the things that did strike me is that while I've absolutely no doubt about the competence of the teachers delivering this part of the curriculum, every pupil knew the teacher who had studied French as a language at school, and everyone enjoyed her classes because they could recognise the difference between a training to deliver and someone who was completely fluent in the language. So I think it emphasised some of the evidence that we've taken from the importance of having native language speakers and that involvement in the school. The school had been involved in the Comenius projects in the past, so they were well aware of some of the aspects that were there, but also did note that the school had run previously trips to Paris with the senior group, but like in all these situations, because of the current economic climate, the school had pulled back, and they weren't intending to run any more international trips. So obviously that was something that would impact the ability of the children to get more exposure to the language.
Yeah, just the only thing I would add to that is one of the things about this primary school is it's the next primary school in South Lanarkshire for a rebuild. So they're waiting to move into a temporary accommodation for a rebuild, and one of the things that they intend to do with the new technology which will be put into that school is to re-engage with connecting classrooms. So they were really keen to do that. Again, the session that I seen, a very competent teacher, a very motivated group of young people who were pushing each other out the way to answer the questions in French in a nice way, but again, it just showed you that motivation and that dedication, and the fact that the kids were having fun. I think that that's the element for teaching younger children. A key element for teaching younger children a foreign language is if you make it fun, then it becomes easy to learn. And I think that was certainly the lesson I learned that day. Okay, Jamie, do you want to come in?
I just wanted to add one thing that I'd forgotten that was on the attached to the back of this. It was on what I told you about the We Big Book project, which is very important because the aim of the project, this was very much part of their teaching. The aim of the project is to produce a series of A3 size books on topics across the curriculum. Teacher guides will be provided and include suggestions for language work as well as further cross-curricular activities on the theme of the book. Scots is taught in all classes. At present, French and Gaelic are taught in P5 to 7, but by August 2013, this will also extend across all stages. The simple text of the books will be in Scots, French and Gaelic, and text will be written by Mrs. Murphy, who's the French teacher. Translations will be provided by specialists with input from pupils at Lochaber High School. I think that's, and then there's some titles of what they've done to date, but I'll give those to you, just to expand a bit on that.
Thank you. Anything else to say on that section? No? You've got all the notes you need? Yeah? Okay. Moving on to agenda item 3 is the Scottish Government's country plan. And we've been looking at China and international framework. We know that Jamie, you're the star of the show today, Jamie. Jamie attended the Marine Harvest Scotland as part of the committee's inquiry into the Scottish Government's country plan. And you doubled up that day. You went to the foreign languages primary school in the morning and seen the business in the afternoon. So good use of resources, Jamie. If you'd like to give us an overview of your visit to the company.
Yes. Well, first of all, I was very grateful for Marine Harvest for sending up such a senior person to see me. And we had a very excellent meeting, and also I visited afterwards the processing factory and saw what was being done. It was you know, they're a very big employer in Fort William, and I had to say that it was amazing because I hadn't visited a salmon processing factory for several years, and the increase in quality of the fish was quite extraordinary compared to what it used to be. And I speak as a former fish farmer a long time ago, but it was very good to see that. Anyway, the summary of our discussion, I think you've got the note on the summary of the discussion. I think everybody's got that. So I'll read that. But on the export to China, Marine Harvest were the first Scottish farmed salmon company to export to China, and are the largest exporter from within the Scottish industry. They're helped very much by the fact that Marine Harvest has 2 offices in China, one in Beijing and one in Shanghai, and the value of sales from Marine Harvest to China in 2011 to 12 was approximately £20 million worth. Marine Harvest has a Chinese logo. Now this was incredibly important, what they told me here, because the word Marine Harvest in Chinese means absolutely nothing at all. So, I mean, I don't know quite how to explain that, but I don't know how to speak Mandarin, but apparently it just simply doesn't mean anything. So they had to rethink what they were going to call it. And Marine Harvest has a Chinese logo, which I think is something like Ma Yai, which were incorporated in to recognize the Chinese character, which is pronounced the same way as delicious, which seems a sensible thing to do. And the words good, beauty, and dignity are also incorporated into the meaning. This branding is used for marketing and communications within the Chinese market. The preferred size profile of the Chinese market is a larger fish. For some reason, they like the bigger fish, which suits everyone. And as a result of AGD, which is amoebic gill disease, a recent disease which has come in, no sales were made from MHS, from Marine Harvest to China in Q4 2012 due to the heavily reduced volume. But exports have begun again in 2013, and approximately 370 tonnes have been sent, and their aim is to increase the sales volumes. Now, the year-on-year sales volume. They were very, she said to me, she said, "Do you want me to moan?" And I said, "No, I don't want you to moan." And she seemed to be very happy, really, with the SDI. But she did say that they were in a far better position than other Scottish salmon companies, partly because they had the expertise in China already there. That it was very important that they had the office there. And also the processing factory is located in a place where it's easy for the lorries to come and pick up the fish. And the shelf life of fresh farmed salmon is about 2 weeks within a box, within a nice box, as long as it's kept at the right temperature. So all their fish are processed in this one processing factory at Marine Harvest. They're picked up, taken to Heathrow, and flown out so that they can be in China in a very, very short time. The quality is immaculate. And I compared it with our visit to Scottish Salmon Company, where I felt that they were, the advantages that Marine Harvest had were ease of getting the product out of the country and also the links they already had in China. They're also a far bigger company and far more worldwide company. Their office in China, for example, deals with fish of all sorts from all over the world. So it's not just Scottish salmon. So they already had the links in place. So I think that was a very important point. Apart from that, they were very grateful, said that they were delighted to see any of us any time again. And after a long discussion, I proceeded on my way.
Thank you. Any questions, Claire?
Yes. Jimmy, you mentioned that in 2012, in the fourth quarter, that they hadn't been able to sell in, but you also mentioned they liked the big fish. Was it all to do with not having the capacity to sell in, or was part of it because of the gill disease, that the fish were smaller? Yeah,
no, I should have made that point. Because AGD is a disease, it's rather like emphysema or COPD in salmon. It starves the fish of oxygen, so they can't. When they get to a certain stage, they start to die. So they have to. There's nothing wrong with the flesh of the fish. This is a little parasite within the gills, and it simply stops them from breathing properly. So they have to cull them earlier. So there were smaller fish, i.e., and the Chinese market doesn't like the smaller fish. So that is why they stopped volume. But they've now, they say they're exporting again now, and hopefully the AGD, which seems to have been the result of increased water temperatures, will not be present this year. They're just keeping their fingers crossed. But they seem to be fairly happy. I mean, they were a company that. I was looking for problems, but there didn't seem to be any. And they didn't even complain about too much red tape and that sort of thing.
It seems a very positive visit. Willie Coffey.
Thanks, Convener. Jamie, there's a wee note at the back of the sheet there about flawed and incorrect HMRC export data. What was the issue there about data?
Where are you referring? Is this on the note?
Yes. Just at the back. What was the issue there? Was it some kind of problem about export data and documentation and issues like that?
Now, wait a minute. Yes, there was. They said they did sometimes have a problem with HMRC, who are the customs. She wasn't very explicit about telling me exactly what it was. I think things have to be exported from. I asked them the question. I said, look, if you could export direct from Scotland, would that help? And they said, well, it would. But they said, in a way, it wouldn't, because the lorry drivers are so used to getting the system of going to Heathrow, and it's so good. But I think the HMRC, I think perhaps we could follow up on that. I'm not quite certain. That she said, well, there was a bit of a problem, but sort of passed over it.
I think one of the advantages of sending fish down south is that many of the lorries that do come up north end up going back empty. But if they're taking a product back, it's not only helpful in the sense that they can export it from there, but it's also helpful in terms of internal national use of the fish industry as well. So there are fringe benefits of the fresh fish product going down to London. Yeah. It's not just only because the customs and excise are more helpful or they're better equipped to deal with the issue. I think it's about the industry and how the industry operates, and there are advantages of that for us as well as the industry. But yeah, I'm sure that we could maybe look at exploring ways of encouraging industry to export directly from Scotland. It would save at least a day, if not more. We could try and see how we can help the industry in that way, and I'm sure that the Customs and Excise will be more than happy to support us.
That raises. They did talk about that. The other good thing about being in Fort William was that they were very close to the fish health inspectors, and that they would come at a moment's notice, and sometimes they would even come during holiday periods. They would arrange their own cover with these people, because you can't, without having these vets there, you can't. They have to stamp the fish and off they go. The labelling is absolutely amazing on the boxes. You can see not only which cage they came from, on which site, but also you could tell which individual had actually packed that box of fish, which I thought was quite amazing. So the traceability element was very good. But they made up again. They said to me, this is a huge advantage for us because in Fort William we've got the fish health inspectors around here, and they will come when they do their best to really try and help us. And they said that this is the disadvantage of some of the remoter fish farms, that they have to wait for ages to get the people to come, that's something that in Scotland, if we looked at, we could maybe help other fish farms, with easier methods. Fort William seems to be a good centre to be in from the business point of view, and they made that point very strongly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
There's no more questions.
No. Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to agenda item 4 is our usual Brussels Bulletin and the latest edition, again in a very changing Europe. The Brussels Bulletin, obviously put together by Ian. As I say, it's a very fluid situation in Europe still. So Ian, give us your messages from Europe this week.
The report from Europe. Let me start with discussions around Cyprus. You'll appreciate that when I was writing it, things were very fluid, so I'm afraid it was pretty much wrong the minute I'd finished it. That being said, just to bring you up to date on where things are, the vote on the package did indeed take place in the Cypriot Parliament. The suggestion was it might a difficult vote. Indeed, it was a very easy vote. Nobody voted for the package at all, so it was quite straightforward. Thereby beginning a very serious process, which is, in a sense, a rejection of the bailout package. And that is combined with the fact that Russia, which is a major depositor and user of the Cypriot banking facility, is also very troubled by this and have declared that their loan to the government, which measures 2.5 billion, may indeed be in jeopardy if things are not resolved in the short term. This has caused a greater resonance across the whole of the Eurozone. Bearing in mind that this is one of the smallest economies in the Eurozone, the bailout package should have been one of the most straightforward. The cost of the bailout mechanism should have been marginal. And despite all of these things, they have managed to create a bailout package which has all but destroyed the growing confidence in the Eurozone's systems, has created a significant problem for the Euro inside Cyprus, and has created repercussions for depositors, not just in Cyprus, but across the whole of the Eurozone. It's hard to believe that this particular package could have created a run on the banks, and that's exactly what it has done. And not just in Cyprus, but now people in the other countries which are fearful that they too will have to take a second package are now removing money from those banks as well. Interestingly enough, the depositors are protected. Their deposits are protected from, one would imagine, almost everything except a tax. And I mean TAX, not an attack. And so what has happened here is this would in effect be a tax, and therefore no depositor is protected. And so even the smallest deposit would be liable to a tax at just over 6%. Higher depositors at a greater one. Now they're trying to remove that and adjust that, but you can see immediately that would affect everybody who has a bank account. Now, how quickly people would stop having a bank account if they were fearful that the risk was they would be taxed. So where things are just now, the banks remain closed in Cyprus. They are trying to find a package which works. Somewhat unhelpfully, the Germans have been very clear on this. They've said, well, perhaps the banks will never open, which I thought was a little bit dramatic. So as you can see, the tension now between Germany, which has an election of its own to face in the months ahead, is being very, very strong on this, and Cyprus is trying its best to find a solution which is absolutely workable. At the moment, the Germans have said to the Cypriots that they should not go to Russia to seek an extension of the loan, and the Cypriots have said, oh yes, we are, and they're off in Russia just now to try and find not only to shore up the loan they already have, but to look at other loan opportunities as well. So that is the Cypriot example. Some other things going on. The Parliament has voted against the multi-annual financial framework, as is their right. Importantly, the Parliament has set out some of its own preconditions. They broadly accept that it will need to be lower, but they don't want to be bound by the ministers and their particular take on this. Their view is, we are a sovereign Parliament, we are a co-decider, you should not be telling us these things, they must be decided in dialogue. And so the trialogue discussions, which will involve the Parliament, the Council and the Commission, will take place in earnest in April. One of the developments which the Parliament are very keen to set out is the shortfall issue continues to bedevil the overall funding. You might recall that they ran out of money last year and it was going to affect various EU programmes. Well, of course, what the Parliament is saying is that you need to basically make sure the books are balanced now, full stop, so there's no rollover at all into the next cycle. And that would then mean quite a significant amount of money would have to be found before the next multi-annual financial framework is signed off. There's a little bit in there about the common agricultural policy. I won't go into that in detail, but you might want to read that. Also, there is some motion, and I know a number of the members here are very interested in the SMP, there's a Freudian slip, the SME issue which is going on here. There are a number of issues which they believe are onerous to small businesses, and there's just a list of the things there, and you'll see some of them things like data protection, working time, recording equipment and road transport. These are the things which small businesses believe are too onerous and they would like to change. European leaders are committed to making changes in these, and that should happen. A couple of other small things. They've agreed the dates now for the European elections of next year, which will be the 22nd to the 25th of May. Something just to note again, at the last election, the turnout in Scotland was the lowest in the UK, 28.6%. UK average was 34.7%. And one final thing, which regards the President of the European Council has declared he will not be seeking another term. So Van Rompuy will demit office at the end of his term on the 1st of December 2014. But happy to take questions on any of the other aspects in here.
Questions?
I just want to make one observation, and this idea about people going out with the European Union to try and resolve financial issues. I think they may be unofficially being encouraged as well, because the European Union can't possibly continue to carry the burden of failing economies. And there's been a whole raft of them, from Greece to Italy to Spain, and now on to, well, not Spain yet, but we've got the islands now. Now, I think one of the issues really is that people want to invest in Europe, particularly in governments, because they're secure investments, long-term secure investments. And I think it can only be helpful if the Russians do come in, because I would have thought that Russians, being the neighbours of the European Union, it is in their best interest as well to ensure that the European economy is buoyant, because they would want to engage with us in terms of international trade. And therefore, it's a win-win, I think, for all of us if that does happen. I don't think that's a bad thing that is happening. I think it's a good, positive development. And it also takes the pressure off Germany, which is now looking at an election. And the Germans have very little room to maneuver in terms of only but to show a very strong defense. And that would be unhelpful for any economy at this stage. And therefore, I don't think it's a bad development. I think it's a good development. And if they're successful, I think it may, in fact, encourage others to look for funding, as we encourage our own community organizations to look for funding other than the government funding. I think it's the same for the European Union, that we also need to be a little bit more, I think, we need to explore the possibilities of venturing outside the European Union to support our hard times.
I don't disagree with that. Germany's not happy at the moment, full stop. That remains broadly the issue throughout the Eurozone just now.
Politically, the stance may be more political rather than financial.
Yes, there are nuances to it, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay, Willie Coffey.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to pick up this issue about Cyprus again with the committee and with Ian. Where on earth did this idea come from to basically introduce state-sponsored looting of people's private savings? And for them to think that wouldn't have the effect that it had, with people queuing up to withdraw their savings from their own accounts. I find it incredible that somebody within Europe came up with that as a means to solve the Cypriot issue. And Ian, is there any value even been placed on the impact that would actually have in terms of Cypriot deficit, for example? Would it cover it? I mean, I really doubt that very much. And lastly, I note your second point there about depositors would be compensated with the equivalent amount in shares in the banks. I mean, does that mean that they get their money back at a later stage, or is it
If the bank comes back.
If the bank ever opens again and comes back? I mean, I'm astounded at this, and it's causing so many problems, right, and worry, further worry, unnecessarily, Convener, right throughout the European Union because of this.
It is certainly unusual. This should have been the easiest bailout of all, because it is the smallest bailout of all, so it shouldn't actually have had any problems. Two things are happening here. One, they believed that, perhaps unsaid but nonetheless implied, which is a lot of the money in Cypriot banks has come from Russia, not all of which is... Okay. Yes, you can fill in the blanks with what that money might be. The issue then is, and Germany was, again, implying a lot of this, that therefore that we should not be compensating questionable investors from Russia. Now, in applying that particular rule, they caught not only, or would seek to catch not only the big fish, but also the minnows as well, which clearly would be a trial. The amount of money raised from this would not be enough to offset the bailout itself. It would be about a third of what the bailout itself would be, so it would be in the smaller proportions. But your point is well made, which is, it seems to have been ill thought through. That I suspect somewhere along the line they believed that the bank shares being offered, which were meant then to be underpinned by the oil wealth, the future oil wealth of Cyprus, so it could be used to offset that, and that these shares may indeed be more valuable than the loss that they've had from their bank accounts. But there's a lot of qualifications using the word may and if and so forth, which I think people were not paying a lot of attention to as they whizzed off to the nearest bank machine and took all their money.
Adamson?
It's actually on a different topic, if that's okay, from the bulletin. I was interested in the clusters and entrepreneurship section, particularly because I know John Swinney in the final budget statement put an additional £50 million into entrepreneurship in Scotland. Can you tell me what the mechanism is for applying for this? Does it have to come from the UK government, or is it something the Scottish government could be looking at? And I'm thinking of areas of the biosciences and also renewables.
Yes, I can. It's not for the member state to bid per se. It's more at the level of, I think they call it regional consortia. So it would be bodies, enterprises, and agencies at the sort of the non-government level. I suspect, however, that the Scottish Government and its agencies, and the UK Government and its agencies, will be seeking to encourage different would-be bidders to come together to draw the money down. So I think, yes, it's not a government drawdown as such, more a government-supported assistance to help others draw down.
Okay, Rod Campbell?
That's more of a way of a comment than a question. I noticed the section on language learning, the comments of the Language and Culture Commissioner in the light of the inquiry we're having, and comments made this morning. It's kind of fairly apposite. I just wondered, well, obviously we can't predict what the new multilingualism proposal will be, but Is there kind of what level of engagement is coming from Europe to kind of initiatives such as the one that we're talking about at the current time? Anything else you can add on that?
It's a good question. I've been asking that question as well to say, what will the multilingualism proposal look like? And more importantly, will there be funding underneath it that helps develop programs and exchanges? From what I understand is they're looking again to expand and enhance the various schemes which exist at the moment, primarily for language teachers and exchanges, which is one aspect of it, to encourage students, so again through the Erasmus programme, to learn, to study abroad, which is also one part of it. But there's also likely to be promotion of this both in businesses and the workplace. So it's looking like moving just away from the academic or the school base, but actually then into the business base as well. So there's one aspect which we're calling, it's about apprenticeships. And it's looking to encourage apprenticeships abroad. So encouraging, in a sense, exchange between like businesses, not just the Erasmus for business might be a better way of describing it. So some of these things are likely to come through. There's no indication yet what money will be underneath it.
Completely separate area, just back to the broadband and the National Infrastructure Database. Anything else you can add about that in terms of reaction at member state level?
Well, I think what's happening just now is that although there's a strong encouragement coming from the EU to move in this direction, it hasn't always been married up with funding that makes the difference at the right level. And so what I think is happening now is, in order to establish where the blind spots are, or the shadows are, is to try and audit, to try and get a sense of exactly how much coverage there is, and then look at how best to target a solution toward that. Although we talk about the UK having significant problems in the rural areas, it actually is nothing compared to some of the problems which member states have to the east. So I think they're looking to try and get a sense of exactly what it is, to how big the problem is, in order for them to target their finances toward a more tailored solution. So I suspect it will be a little bit. It will probably move into the next the next multi-annual financial framework as they begin to target that money more exactly. But remember, there is still money left in the current allocation for broadband.
Okay, Jimmy McGregor.
Just a couple of quick ones, which you may or may not be able to answer. Just on the question of the CAP, when it talks about capping payments for big farmers, does that mean that there will be extra money within a package in member states? The capping will take place in member states, will it? Not across the whole board, as it were.
The capping is a hectare. It's a land size, if you like, acreage cap. So the idea being that if a farm is more than a certain size, that they will not be able to simply get the multiplier on the basis of their acreage, because it's normally an acre multiplier, but rather it will be capped after they reach. And I think the figures are in a previous bulletin, but I would be misleading if you're trying to remember them just now. So what this will mean is that from the overall national allocation, there will certainly be less money spent at the higher end, the bigger farms, and that money will be within the same envelope, so it should be available for... So
it should be a redistribution of sorts?
It should broadly be a redistribution of sorts, yes.
Thank you. And the second point was on broadband, which I noticed you put... just purely on the figures that we saw before, when we saw that there were going to be... that telecoms were being cut, that the money for telecoms were being cut by something like 80%, I think. Is that, you put here, the Commission wants member states to set up national infrastructure databases, and any operator bidding for public money will also need to declare what infrastructure they own to do with sharing infrastructure. And I see that's obviously a very sensible thing to do. But do we know now if there's going to be enough money to, and is there any, do we know any further if there's going to be less money for broadband, or whether it's safe enough, what's been promised so far?
You're right to remember that the figures which we last considered at this committee was an 80% cut in the budget heading for broadband, yes, for the telecoms area. The Parliament didn't like that. They thought that was sending the wrong message. But at the moment, they haven't they haven't begun to put out what they would see in preference to it. The trilogue negotiations, which will take place in April, should begin to reveal some of the details about what that particular funding line should look like. I think the Commission are being preemptive here and recognising that if there is less money, what's the best way of ensuring that a smaller amount of money is spent wisely and sensibly. And that's why some of the stuff here talking about infrastructure sharing, revealing what's there already, the notion of an audit of what is available to allow the money to go where it can do the most good, rather than simply spending the money with the quality. It's more to focus upon needs. So no to the answer that is the first answer, which is we should know more about that in April. But this was actually to make sure that whatever is available is spent more in a more focused fashion.
Can I have one more question? Well, you just mentioned the trilogue discussions, which is between the Council, the Commission and the Parliament. Is that correct? Can you just explain the significance of these trilogue discussions in relation to what actually happens at the end of the day?
Yes. The trilogue discussions bring together the key players. So, as you'll recall, that the multi-annual financial framework is broadly co-decided. So the Parliament has to sign it off, but it doesn't have the powers to sign off the individual parts of it. So the trilogue will be an attempt to make sure that negotiations can take place to allow the Parliament to be content to sign off the whole thing. So in May and almost certainly through into June, what will happen is the Parliament will state very clearly things it will not accept. And unless those things are changed, what it will mean is the Parliament in plenary will not vote for the whole thing. So they will set their red lines for these negotiations. And I think what you'll see is there may be some of these which are very political, there may be some which are very totemic, but what they'll be trying to do is demonstrate that they are a Parliament with equal powers. So some of it may be a little bit of posturing, but at the same time, where there are issues which are very important to particular countries or regions, whether it be regional broadband or agricultural funding, these will become the issues upon which the negotiations will turn. Now, as you will recall, the Member States are very keen. Their view is, we've done it now, this is it, take it or leave it. We don't want to be meddling anymore with this, we've reached agreement. The Parliament's view is, oh no, you haven't, this is not acceptable to us, we would like there to be significant change within the detail of it. And the Commission are there more or less to hold the coats. It's their job to allow the two to fight back and forward. When an agreement is reached, they will draft up the outcome of that. But the Parliament are very determined to make sure that the complexion of the multi-annual financial framework reflects more what they would wish to see in it, and not as much as what the Member States would like to see within it. And if no agreement is reached, again, the current settlement rolls over, if you like, for another year, which has some advantages to some, but disadvantages to others. So, for example, if you're experiencing a significant or likely significant cut in your agricultural funding, you would much prefer that this year is just to roll over, because you would keep the money then. So there will be a lot of games being played where Member States are determined to get the best for their citizens.
Thank you very much.
Okay. There's a couple of points I would like to pick up, picking up on Rod's point in the languages learning, multilingualism proposal in 2014. Would it be appropriate for this committee to draw to our language inquiry to the attention of Commissioner Vassalou? Yes. Would that be appropriate? Because I think we've learned quite a few lessons from what we're doing here. And if you look at the figures, learning a different language in Sweden is 82% of the population, but only 9% in Britain. So it just shows you the vast gap there. And maybe we could learn something from that proposal, but offer something of the means that we are taking to address that one. So that would be my first thing. Yes, he is actually, yeah. Jenny's just reminded me that Commissioner Vassalou is coming for our conference, our languages conference, which is on Europe Day, isn't it, in May? Yeah. So we'll have direct conversations with him at that point as well. So very valuable to have someone of that status coming along. Another quick thing was just to make a mention of the sustainable transport, and the Aberdeen City Council came top out among 3 finalists, among Toulouse and Slovenia, Ljotmar in Slovenia. So just obviously to make reference to that, again, winning awards around the world. Another wee question I had was about the Croatian accession and how some countries are losing the European Parliament seats because the limit is 751. I was very interested to see that Germany will lose 3 seats if it's 99, bringing it to 96, which is the maximum allowed in the Lisbon Treaty. And I'm just looking at the number of MEPs that Germany has in relation to the number of MEPs that maybe other countries have, yes. Which maybe gives us a direct link to the power that's there in the Parliament for Germany.
Yes, it does. Because they've capped the number of seats in the Parliament, it means that any new accession states coming in will get their allocation dependent upon the formula, but in order to allow them to be seated, they have to subtract from other member states then whose balance drops. So you'll see that quite a few are losing one MEP, but again capping the maximum number. So it's got a name like digressive proportionality, which means that smaller member states will be entitled to a greater share than an equal proportion would allow for. So the smaller states, so for example, on a population basis, Malta would have very few, I think would probably qualify for less than 1, if that makes any sense to you. But actually by the digressive proportionality, I think it has 5. Yeah. So the smaller member states are always slightly more represented, and the larger member states like Germany, like France and the UK will always receive less because they are at the top end. So that's certainly true. In terms of the Commissioner Vassiliou's ambitions, they're very interested in what this committee is doing, and they would welcome the report which this committee will produce. We know that the Director General is coming to the event. I think there'll be great merit in launching this report in Brussels with the Commissioner. I see no reason why not. It's going to be a powerful document, and that may be perhaps something that can be thought of for the autumn season, which would be a good thing.
Okay, thanks very much. A very, very quick question on the back of what you've said about accession. So if a country gains its independence, for instance, and already has MEPs, would that be less of an impact then on the issue with the cap? I know that's yes. It's a potentially political question, but I'm trying to make it as
yes, and
as non-political as possible.
I can make it non-political. I think how can I make it non-political? The challenge would be for a member state, were it to have different components, that which steps away becoming a smaller part would be entitled to more, I would anticipate, because it would be smaller and the digressive proportionality would kick in. The question then becomes whether, because the original state had a cap on its number of MEPs, whether it lost any from its entitlement or not. And I don't know the answer to that. It would be a formula which is available and you could calculate it. Okay. But it's probably a fiddly formula, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I would have thought that any state or any country within the European Union, if it split from its original body, for example, either Scotland or Spain or any other part of the Europe, you would first of all lose your MSPs, members of European Parliament initially till you either rejoined or became a member, and it would not affect your membership's quantity because you were a part of another country before, because you would be an independent nation in your own right, and therefore your population would be taken into account as, for example, Malta. And that's how they would deem it. Whether other members lost members or not is another issue. They may well lose members, but I think there will probably be a cap on total membership in the European Union, and they probably have worked through that system.
The challenge for the whole EU is were it to continue to grow with accession states. If you cap the numbers at say 754, then clearly, as more join, everybody has to then take a hit. Yes. Jamie?
Just a tiny question on that. If the population of a country increases, do they get more members?
If they were doing a lot of increasing, I imagine they would be entitled for more members. But I think it would have to be a lot of breeding would have to be going on over a period to.
Yes.
No, you are right. If there were, it's more to do with if there were a huge population migration, perhaps into into one, and therefore the population did change. Then yes, the formula would be applied, and yes, but it's, usually the changes are minimal, so they don't move that much.
Yeah. Jamie's just nodding a hint to his very prolific fatherhood, and is it 5 children you have, Jamie? 6. I just wanted to draw that bit to the attention, because whether you're accession or succession or whatever, I think given our future work on the referendum bill and some of the aspects of our European position within that, I think it's just a wee marker for that, something that we would need to consider. So we consider all of the questions, things like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Are we happy to make sure that our relevant committees get the copy of the Brussels bulletin? And I think maybe our Infrastructure Transport Committee should be made aware of the award to Aberdeen. Yes. So, yeah. Okay. That concludes our business for today. And our next meeting, because of... No, we haven't. We haven't. I'm way ahead of myself. Sorry. Here's me thinking. It's EU priorities. Got it. Got it. Under here. Sorry, obviously I'm jumping ahead of myself already. We have to, yes, spend a bit of time considering the our EU priorities report. We will now consider, and you have a small paper in your papers there, a report from Local Government and Regeneration Committee, which sets out its EU priorities. Due to an administrative error, they were not included with the committee's published report, and we did give a commitment to come back and do that at this committee at this time. And failing my rush to get out of committee today, we nearly forgot about them again, and I apologise for that. Really, if I just refer you to paper number 4 and invite any comments if you've got any. Yeah, Rod?
Agreed.
Agreed? Yeah, agreed. Okay, so if you're content, we will publish this paper with a flourish, please, and on the committee's website, and draw it to the attention of the Local Government Committee as well. Thank you very much. So actually moving on to our final bit today, because of the way the recess falls and the way our parliamentary sitting time for this committee is structured, our next meeting will be the 18th of April, so after recess, and we will be hearing evidence from the Minister for Learning, Science and Scotland's Languages on our languages inquiry. And I think that there is a huge document of that Jenny has provided us all for reading over the recess, so just in case you've got nothing else to do, this is all of the evidence pulled together, and I think maybe worthwhile having even just a scan through it to get some of the relevant questions for the Minister. And can I wish you all a very restful, if not reading a lot, recess.
Sure,
Thank you.
Can I actually...
Will that meeting start at 8:50? Or at 9 o'clock?
8:50.
Camille, I just want to go back to the document that has been put together for us in terms of the report. Could we actually have a shorter version of that?
What our plan was, we're giving this just now, that will actually form the basis of the beginning of the report. So you will get a shortened version of it. This is just to give you the actual evidence itself as a fallback, but no, it will be considerably shortened down and focused. Yeah.
Okay, happy? I close this meeting.